Did you know about the American government's secret plan for surviving the end of the world? Newly declassified CIA files offer a glimpse of the playbook the Trump administration will reach for if it stumbles into a nuclear war. Do you know how close we are to a nuclear war right now? Calm down, Kim. Now China is seriously concerned noisy neighbor North Korea will spark a nuclear war. The communist giant hits out after Kim Jong-un's rogue state vowed to carry on testing nukes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very close to a nuclear war of sorts. Depending on how big it gets from there, who knows? Who knows? Among the greatest foreign policy dilemmas faced by former President Jimmy Carter is one that has never been publicly aired, but is gaining new relevance. Let me go on a tangent for just a quick second here. The administration that is currently occupying the White House had better get its act together, and here's why. The carrier threat, the USS Carl Vinson, who is supposed to be heading towards Korea. Listen to this. This is on the Wall Street Journal. Despite representations by Trump and defense advisors, Vinson was thousands of miles away on exercises off northwest coast of Australia. Washington. The Navy confirmed Tuesday that it did not send one of its aircraft carriers directly toward North Korea amid growing tensions with Pyongyang, despite representations by President Donald Trump and his top defense advisors that it was on its way. Trump came out and said, "We're sending an armada." Did he not? Turns out it was nothing. Turns out he has not even sent, not him, but the aircraft carrier was not even hasn't even left where it's been stationed, it has not even left the drills yet. In fact, the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson was thousands of miles away on exercises off the northwest coast of Australia and likely won't arrive near the Korean peninsula until sometime next week. The U.S. Pacific Command released a statement Tuesday that said the Vinson is now heading toward the Western Pacific, as ordered after a shortened training exercise with the Australian Navy. The statement described the move as a prudent measure. The White House avowed deployment of the Vinson came as foreign adversaries from the Middle East to Russia and the Far East have been looking to test the mettle of Mr. Trump. On Tuesday, the Pentagon announced that it scrambled fighter planes earlier this week to intercept 2 Russian bombers off the coast of Alaska, which, by the way, happened 2 days in a row. It also happened on Tuesday, the first such incident since 2015. How Mr. Trump's muscular response to North Korea morphed into a false narrative about a naval armada sailing in a show of force toward waters off the coast of North Korea appears to be a story of mixed and contradictory messages that the Navy appeared to notice in the past week but made no strenuous moves to correct. Our allies in the region, if something sparked, that's a terrible, terrible strategy. They have got to get it together. Among the greatest foreign policy dilemmas faced by former President Jimmy Carter, now we're going back to the CIA docs, is one that has never been publicly aired but is gaining new relevance. It concerns nuclear war and how the U.S. government would survive it. Carter's decisions remain classified, but documents newly declassified by the CIA, along with the archives at several presidential libraries, provide a new window into the White House's preparations for an imminent apocalypse. Today, such an apocalypse could be triggered by any number of nuclear-armed states, including North Korea and Pakistan. During Carter's presidency, such anxieties were focused squarely on the Soviet Union. It was during that period that military planners in both the Soviet Union and the United States began to grapple with what until then had been an unthinkable heresy, abandoning the mutually assured destruction catechism that had governed global order since the 1950s and preparing for surviving all-out nuclear war. Carter and his White House were interested in more specific questions. If the presidency could survive after a nuclear war, what exactly would it do afterward? How could the surviving commander-in-chief be identified? Who would identify him? How would he fulfill the three main functions of the presidency: to be the chief executive of the government, the head of state, and the commander-in-chief of its armed forces? Carter's answers came in the form of Presidential Directive 58, which was issued in the final months of his presidency. Ronald Reagan amended those plans with his own presidential directives in 1983. Their contents inform the continuity of government plans that remain in effect for the Trump administration. They have been the object of a multi-billion-dollar collective of programs and a magnet for conspiracy theorists around the world. What follows is a glimpse at how the government developed some of its most closely held national security secrets, and how the Trump administration or any of its successors might rely on them to survive the end of the world as we know it. You can survive. This is the image. You can live through an atom bomb raid, and you won't have to have a Geiger counter, protective clothing, or special training in order to do it. The secrets of survival are: know the bomb's true dangers, know the steps you can take to escape them. This is from the National Civil Defense Pattern. When Carter took office, the Soviet Union had a head start on preparing for nuclear war. It had an expensive civil preparedness program, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of underground bunkers, and extensive continuity of government programs. The United States, for its part, had Ray Derby. Born in Iowa in 1935, Derby became one of the Defense Department's premier experts on emergency preparedness and disaster response. In Europe, he led non-combatant evacuation drills across NATO, training the trainers who evaluated each unit's ability to absorb and withstand an attack. In the U.S., he led numerous government-wide task forces on civil defense for nuclear, biological, and chemical accidents. He also developed the standard plan that America's nuclear bases would use in a disaster. By the time of Carter's inauguration in 1977, he was in charge of training and operations at the West Virginia Operations Office in the General Services Administration's Federal Preparedness Agency, or FPA. At the time, the principal federal plan for catastrophic disasters like nuclear war, Federal Emergency Plan D, called for each federal agency to design, develop, and build its own hardened underground facility. In an emergency, the government would be run from the bunkers. Most agencies did not take the responsibility too seriously. The FPA tasked Derby with evaluating the implementation of Plan D. First thing he noticed was that agencies rarely, if ever, rehearsed their respective plans. Few had made any provisions for maintaining vital records, even the laws, regulations, and directives that agencies used in their daily work. Many agency employees didn't even know whether they were part of the teams that were supposed to evacuate during a disaster. The American public said in polls that they wanted a civil defense program, but they lived in peace and didn't pay attention to its development. We've seen the rise of these FEMA agencies and how vast their underground connected networks are as of today. But it didn't begin just recently. It's been going on for several decades. These failures were the product of systematic neglect since the dawn of the nuclear age. Aside from a brief boom after the Cuban Missile Crisis, during which 6 federal government relocation centers were built around the nation, the U.S. did not treat civil defense as a part of a strategic deterrence. The federal government proved eager to spend money to upgrade weapons, not to protect the population or help them survive a nuclear attack. In the 1970s, many government agencies gave up planning post-disaster operations, assuming that the various federal organizations that had the word preparedness or mobilization in their titles were taking care of it. You just heard it. The government does not plan to protect the people. The government plans to protect itself. Which means, whether it be today, tomorrow, or 5 years, we had all better be ready for whatever comes down the road. You can believe that the government is totally prepared and stocked, and so should you be. Derby thought the problem was larger than funding. The American public said in polls that they wanted a civil defense program, but they lived in peace and didn't pay attention to its development. They might have assumed that a big program existed somewhere out there, ready to be used in a Soviet attack. By the 1970s, the duck and cover years had given way to comfort. There was no urgency, and presidents were not insisting on any. There was one other complication to effectively save the country during a nuclear war. The military had to cross one of its red lines by getting involved in domestic security. After nuclear war, martial law would almost certainly have to be declared, and the military given extraordinary powers to manage resource distribution, but the government also assumed that some sort of martial law would be required before the start of an actual war. As soon as it believed a war might be imminent, the government planned to move significant parts of the population, specifically those who lived near significant strategic military targets, and policymakers knew this might require a degree of coercion, even force. The military did not like to talk about this scenario, and neither did its politicians. Plans were therefore developed in secret and classified, ensuring less visibility and public accountability. And what about members of the government themselves? In an emergency or a changing of the defense condition status, the Joint Chiefs of Staff would order 60 officials to primary relocation sites. The government operated a so-called special facility atop Mount Weather in Virginia, where a cadre of top executive branch officials would ride out a nuclear war. Other standby relocation sites were near Maryland and Martinsburg, West Virginia, at the main base near Quantico, Virginia, for the FBI and Front Royal, Virginia, near a facility where the State Department was supposed to reconstitute. Still, others were hidden at colleges inside or near the Beltway. They hid these facilities in plain sight, at colleges. Well, fast forward to today, because the same plan is still in play. The Trump administration has this plan in case of an event and in case of a nuclear war. Walmarts, large department stores, the things from 2015 and Jade Helm all ring a big bell, don't they? If we understand what took place over the past several years and how FEMA has actually been preparing for this in secret, then we know exactly what happens in the event that a war hits our shores. Martial law. And they're going to use troops and police and the government forces to forcibly relocate people. How about FEMA camps? This plan is still in play, but it's not new. It's very old. So what makes it crazy for people to ponder what the government is doing about preparedness? The FPA and FEMA, they've been getting ready for a long time. The question is, are you? That's all I got for you. God bless and carry on. We are under attack. The mainstream media is getting desperate. The old media is dying. And they're not going anywhere without a fight. We must weather the storm. We have something they don't. You. We need your help. Become a member of the Christian Truther for $1.50 per month, using the discount code in the description to support us in this fight and get access to all of our unlimited content. God bless you and thank you.